If you start to like pin a butterfly to a board to inspect it, you lose the majesty of its flying, right? You lose the majesty of its metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly.
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today I have as my guest Dr. Natalie Marr. She's a clinical psychologist who offers nationwide coaching and educational services through learntoloveyourstory.com. She has sat across the couch from clients for thousands of hours over the past 2 decades, helping her clients learn to love their stories. Her vast expertise in a variety of evidence-based approaches is eclipsed only by her intuitive ability to cultivate one's own curiosity, growth, and wisdom. Dr. Natalie provides significant insights that foster an understanding of oneself, and that's what we love here. When we understand ourselves and what brought us here, it leads to more kindness, more peace, and more compassion for our own stories. Welcome, Dr. Natalie.
Thank you, Rachel. I am really excited to get to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. And I love when we talk about that compassion for our own stories and others' stories, I would assume as well. But first, it starts with us. And so let's dive into that a little bit. I'd love to know how you got into your field. How did you come to hone the work that you're doing now?
You know, it's always an interesting question to answer, a common question that I get when I guest on podcasts or do other things. And I have to say, the more I look back on my work across time, the more I can see that thread that kind of goes through it that I wouldn't have known 2 decades ago, more than that, actually. I started in graduate school the week of 9/11, as a matter of fact, was my first week of graduate school. So I had been applying to graduate schools for the, several months ahead of that. And I remember in most of my graduate school applications, they'll ask you kind of what brings you to this field? What are you thinking about when you're going into psychology? And I always had kind of this tongue-in-cheek response of, well, I'm the middle child of 5. And so I've been doing this for a while. And now I'd like to know what it is I'm doing, because I'm also a really curious person and always want to consume more knowledge on things. And that's still not untrue. It's been a facet of my life for a long time that I just am constantly curious about why we tick the way that we do, why we do what we do and we do it. And in particular, I grew up in a family that had alcoholism in it and had intergenerational trauma of alcoholism. Like my dad was not the first alcoholic in his family, but he was the predominant alcoholic in my family, and my mom, the predominant codependent in my family. And growing up in a family of 5 kids, watching us all start to grow in literally 5 different directions was fascinating to me. I watched other families, because that's just kind of what I was. My mom said that, in the early 80s when I had to get glasses because just bad eyesight, they didn't have kids frames in the early 80s. So you had like these huge plastic frames and these little baby faces. And she said, like, I just knew you were in the corner of the room, like a little owl, just watching everything that was happening, Natalie. And she wasn't incorrect. Like, that is exactly what I was doing. I was always observing. And I watched other friends of me, like, have family systems that everybody had a little bit more similarity. And in my family, we were all very divergent. And that was part of the alcoholism, right? We all took on whatever the role was that we were assigned. And I think that what brought me to this field and what keeps me so just entrenched in the curiosity of it all is just there are some predictabilities in human behavior. And so once you kind of get that science down, you have a better handle on Why is someone hurting? Why is somebody not healing, not growing yet? And I really just love figuring that out and unpacking that puzzle with people and helping them to see it in their own time and step into their own healing journey. So that's my real answer to that. I know it's a long answer to that question, Rachel, but I can see that even, early in my life, that was really what was happening. Is I've just been a consummate observer of human behavior and endlessly curious about why we tick the way that we do.
Yep, I hear that. Also, child, also alcoholism in the family. Yeah, so it's I feel you, sister.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and maybe that is why, we want these answers, and some of us. I mean, it's also very interesting. I have two sisters on either side, and yeah, very different women. We're very different women. And so I can see how that would be fascinating. Something else that was fascinating to me as I was reading through your materials and getting to know you a little better was that you question, and I just honed in on this, are there really mental illnesses?
Yes.
I wonder if you could speak to that, because that's like all the ears just prick up, like, oh my God, well, of course there are.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
now I come from a spiritual background as well, right? So in the shamanic culture, there are no mental illnesses. There's only illness of spirit. So so I'd love to hear your perspective, which may or may not be spiritual.
Well, I think, science and spirituality are more intertwined than we'd like to advertise them as in pop culture. Putting that subject matter aside, because it's its own little wormhole. I think that for me, what I've always looked at is that the human psyche operates in a certain way, right? There are some predictabilities to it. There is some, individuality, of course, in that, but there's some rules kind of. And so as a scientist, that's what we're looking for, right? Is some predictability, something that we can kind of, oh, if I see this, it might mean this stuff. And so then I can dig down that avenue and see if I can help somebody. And so early on in the medical model of clinical psychology, I was really frustrated by this problem focus, like that I was doing that to name something. And then what? Then I'm done? Like that doesn't make any sense. I'm a clinician to help people, heal, not to name something and say, well, you have depression, so go to your doctor, get a pill and you'll be fine. Like that's not how that works. And so I started to really think about it in a different way. I started to think about the human psyche as always being the way that it should be. It's showing us exactly what it should be showing us given a context. And so for me, I think that a lot of people's issues are, iterations of oppressions, iterations of programming and conditioning from culture and family and religion and all sorts of things that tell us a story that something is wrong with us, when actually what our human psyche is doing when it's depressed or anxious or upset in some fashion or not healed in some fashion, it's doing something right. It's telling us that something is wrong about the context. And that's really what needs to shift, not something wrong about us. So I use the cues of what our body mind is telling us to help clients, help myself, help clients navigate like what it is in that context that isn't working for them. And yet, really what I believe is it's the context. It's really what's around you more than it is you. If you think about what is happening in you is going right, not an illness, but like what I would expect to see given this context, then it helps you, I think, empower yourself to say, oh, well, then I can change context. Like I can't change my body, mind, my makeup, like what I'm made of, but I certainly can change context and change how I respond in different contexts if I learn different skills. And that helps people, I think, tremendously. Again, I don't like that problem focus, that illness focus that just feels like, you're a victim of your circumstance.
Yeah.
I am really more on the end of helping people feel empowered and able to just, take on anything, including major depression or anxiety disorders or trauma disorders, which is one of my specialties, which can seem insurmountable in the way that they're described in our culture. They're just, all they are is a sequelae of symptoms to me. It's a pattern of symptoms to me that I'm going to help you kind of read it so that you can better understand what in your context isn't working for you, isn't serving you any longer.
Right. And I wonder thank you for that explanation. That was beautiful. Because we're also, what I love about it, first of all, is the empowerment part. That's not a word I love. It's a little buzzy for me, but the idea of reminding us of our inherent power, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
our strengths that we have. But really this idea that there's a difference. There's a little bit of a bridge we have to cross between consciously understanding where, for example, our trauma came from and what our skill sets are, and believing that we can take that bridge across. Do you find that with your
clients? Yeah. I think that part of that is this narrative that we've been fed from culture, society, family, all those, different sources that like, we're just so materialistic. Like, thank God Isaac Newton had a apple fall on his head, and we were able to kind of discover some of those more material based facts in physics and science. Unfortunately, though, from that and from Descartes, who kind of negotiated with the church early on that he could chop up dead bodies and learn about like how the body operates as a mechanism. What it did is it took the spirit out. It took the stuff that you're really much more familiar with than I am out of the equation. And if you start to like pin a butterfly to a board to inspect it, you lose the majesty of its flying. Right? You lose the majesty of its metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly. And the life of it is really such an important feature, I think, in that. And I think that some of that bridge, we're helping people kind of see themselves as bigger than the sum of their parts, or the product of their mechanism of being a human, that they're much bigger than that. And so you want them to step into that power. And you're right. I think like, to go back to the empowerment phrase is a little bit buzzword, is a little bit pop culture-y. And it's the word that best within our English language is encapsulating what I'm trying to get at, which is like, take it from inside. Empower is meaning you've already have it, right? I want you to take it from the inside instead of trying to find answers on the outside of you.
Yeah. And I love that message too. And it really, sometimes it's just that reminder of what we're capable of and where we come from, which you talk about. And so when you encounter, and I know I do as well, so I'm assuming it's the same for you. When you encounter a client who says, okay, this is great. I know that my anxious attachment comes from being neglected as a child. And so now what do I do with that? Like, I'm aware of it, but, and so it's, or even deeper, I can't seem to turn that behavior off. I can't seem to stop nagging at my partner to make sure that they're with me all the time, or checking the phone or whatever, because it's just sort of a part of who I am. There's almost like a self-worth element that's brought into it. What do you find?
Well, I do remind people that about 90%, probably more, but if we're being conservative, about 90% of what we do is a habit of being ourselves. That our neural pathways have gotten into the habit of thinking of Rachel as this and thinking of Natalie as this. And so anxious attachment is a name that we apply to, again, a set of ways of being and interacting interpersonally in your relationships because of what you experienced in your early relationships, most often with your primary caregivers. And that becomes a habit. Like, that literally was the foundation that all other layers of what I learned to do and be in relationships was built upon.
Yeah.
So it's going to be near impossible to extricate that from how you think about relationships. What I think is brilliant about self-awareness, and I call it compassionate self-awareness. So I kind of combine those elements of self-compassion with awareness. What I think is brilliant about it is it allows your observer self, your conscious awareness, to be online and watch yourself doing the thing instead of just being in it.
Yeah.
If I'm in my anxious, attachment, I'm just doing things out of habit and I don't realize what I'm doing. But once I have awareness, I've kind of pushed myself back enough to see the back of my hands. And now I'm like, oh, so this is the habit of being me that I'm doing right now. I also could choose something else, though. If I am the observer, I'm also the one that's empowered to make different choices. And that's what I think can be so brilliant about that self-awareness. It doesn't feel like a lot when you just name that for clients that are new to that concept. So it is something that we have to kind of, I think, really help hold the hand of a client through their journey with it until they really see the effects of the power of just naming and knowing this is not me. This is something that became a habit for me, but it isn't me at the core. Me at the core is the one that observes it all. So I might be able to choose differently at some point.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. And again, there's that power, like burning new neural pathways of how to manage what we are habitually doing in our behaviors. So what is it? So I get this question a lot because I'm also a life coach and a therapist. And then what's the difference between the two? And
Yeah.
I think of a life coach more as a cheerleader, you could do it, and that's important. But a therapist, it really is more interested in the source of, and this is something that you focus on as well. And this, like, where are these feelings coming from? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if you could speak to how does knowing our past help our present?